Hey everyone, thanks for joining Learn to Play Games. My name is Lance, and today I'll be teaching you how to play Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles from IDW Games. This is a 1 to 5 player game that takes roughly 1 to 2 hours to play and has 2 different modes in it. It has a fully cooperative mode where all the players are working together to defeat the game itself, or there's a 1 versus many mode where one player will control the villain and all of the enemies, and the other players will be playing the heroes. This is the first game in IDW's AUG system, or Adventure Universal Game System, of which there's going to be many core games, and each one that you own can be combined together to create all kinds of custom scenarios, introducing new heroes from different universes, or new enemies and villains from different universes, playing through your own custom scenarios, or playing through the scenarios that are included in the game already, but with new combinations. In this video, I'll be teaching you how to play the cooperative, the fully cooperative mode, and in a later video, I'll cover the 1 versus many mode. In this one, I'll be covering components, setup, player and enemy turns, and endgame conditions. I did go back in and reshoot some things, so some of the shots will look a little bit different as I've gotten some new equipment, and I definitely wanted to take advantage of that, as the video that I shot a little while ago covering this, I wasn't completely happy with all the different things, and I wanted to make sure I captured all the different rules and some of the different difficult rules that people have had a lot of questions on. So I wanted to go back in and reshoot those, so you're going to notice some of that in the video, but I just wanted to point that out. So as always, if you find these videos helpful, if you like what I do, please consider hitting that like button, subscribe to my channel. It's one of the easiest ways you can support channels like mine so we can continue to grow and produce this content. If you want to stay updated on all my videos, also consider ringing that bell so you get notifications anytime I release new videos. So let's go ahead and head to the table and I'll teach you how to play. There are 2 custom sets of dice included in the game. The first set are the action dice, and each hero is going to have a custom set of 3 action dice that are tailored to that hero. And the heroes included are Michelangelo, Raphael, Leonardo, Donatello, and Casey Jones. Each of these sets of dice is going to have different symbols on them, but there are 5 basic symbols that you'll find on most of these dice. The turtle shell, which is for defense, skateboard for movement, shuriken for ranged attack, katana for melee attack, and the chi symbol that's going to give the hero focus, let them roll for health, and we'll let them change that symbol to any other symbol on that die. Then each of the heroes is going to have special symbols that are going to be found on their dice. For example, with Michelangelo, he focuses on movement, so he has a pair of skateboards, where Raphael focuses on ranged attacks, so he has a pair of shuriken, and Donatello is more about defense, so he has a turtle shell and a katana, which lets him both gain defense and will let him perform a melee attack. And again, each of these is going to be tailored to that hero. And then the second set of dice are the combat dice. Each die is going to have 3 sides with 1 hit, 1 side with 2 hits, and 2 sides with turtle shells, which will count as a defensive success. In cooperative mode, you'll be using the initiative cards, and each hero and enemy is going to have initiative cards, and some enemies will have multiple initiative cards as well, and each scenario is going to tell you when to include those, or the enemy's card will instruct you as well. Some of the scenarios you play will include allies, and each ally's card is going to list the name of that ally, their allegiance, and their ability, and when and how it'll be triggered. With some of the evil allies even having a separation in abilities based on if you're playing competitive or cooperative modes. Moving over to the character cards, starting with the heroes, each hero's card is going to have the name of the hero on the top, along with the hero's faction and faction icon, and then these 6 different stats for that hero, which are the hero's movement, base attack and defensive stats, the number of skill cards the hero will start the scenario with, the maximum number of focus tokens a hero can have, his number of hit points, and his awakening stat, and I'll cover how this works a little bit more later. And then each hero is going to have 1 or more abilities, and each ability will have a name and the details of that ability. Finally, on the bottom of the card is the breakdown of each of the icons on a hero's die. Each hero has their own deck of skill cards that they will have access to, and at the beginning of each scenario, they're going to select a number of these cards to take into that scenario. Each one of these cards is going to list the cost in action icons the hero must spend in order to activate that card, and then the effects of that card, and then finally at the bottom of the card is the hero that that card is associated with. Now I know that there's been a number of questions on these, so I want to go into a little bit more detail with them. So first off, each of these cards with the cost, this is separate from the attack itself unless the attack specifically says otherwise. This is not going to add to your attack stat. So with this one, for example, with Leonardo, let's say that he rolls these dice, these action dice here. So in order to activate Leaping Strike, he's going to have to spend the 2 katanas to activate that. And then it says that Leo leaps up to 3 spaces in a straight line, and then he's going to make an attack at 2 plus his melee strike. So in order to calculate this then, you're going to look at Leo's base attack stat, which is 1, as you can see here. So we would add 1 combat dice for that. And then this is going to add 2 additional combat dice for this card. So Leo would make an attack with 3 combat dice. Another one that I noticed has been giving people problems is the double chuck with Michelangelo. So this is another good example. Let's go ahead and say that Michelangelo rolls this result here, and Leo was sharing his double katana with him. So with this one, it costs 1 katana, and with it says that Mikey makes 2 attacks at +1, and then he gets to add +1 die to both strikes per additional katana spent. So with this one, let's say that we spend this double katana, 1 to activate the ability, and then 1 will be added to the attack, because you're not allowed to split katanas between different actions, but you can use the additional katanas if the attack itself or the card itself specifies that you can. So with this one, we would have his base attack stat first. So Mikey has a base attack stat of 1 attack die. Then this is going to add +1 to that, so it'll add +1 attack die to each one of those. And then it's also going to add an additional die for each additional katana we spend. So with this one, we have 1 extra one that we did not use in the costs. So it's going to add 1 additional to each attack. And then Mikey does have a couple of other katanas he could spend. So let's say that he spends that one. Now he's going to be throwing 4 attack dice per attack that he does. The other type of character cards are the villain character cards, and these are for the cooperative mode. Each of these will have the name of the villain on the top, along with the villain's faction icon and faction that they're associated with, and then any other attributes that villain has. And these are going to be important to look at, such as the leader and minion will determine the number of action points that particular character has when activating. Then you have the 4 different stats for that character, which are the number of movement points it has, its damage when attacking, the number of defense that villain has, and the number of hit points they have. Then each villain is going to have 1 or more abilities, and each ability will have an ability name and a description of that ability. On the bottom of the card is the secondary targeting priority for that villain and the villain's attack type, which is either going to be melee or ranged attacks. Moving into setup, the first thing you want to do is select a scenario you want to play, and for this video I went ahead and selected the very first scenario, Something Stinks. At that point, then you're going to reference the diagram, placing out all of the different board tiles, any tokens or tiles that go on top of that, and then the figures that are going to be placed out. One other important note with the figures is that you want to reference this guide here, as you can see, to determine the total number of figures that are being used for this particular scenario, as some of the scenarios will have you add more figures than the ones that are out on the board. In that situation, any additional figures will be placed off to the side, and then those will come in later on during spawn steps or other conditions that the scenario will specifically outline. From there, then you want to place out the quick reference guide cooperative mode board, and then I'll show you how to create the initiative deck. So as you can see here in this diagram that you'll find in the scenario book, you'll place out 1 of each of the hero's cards, and then 1 of each of the enemies, unless it lists otherwise, which is the case with the Thug Brawlers, as that one will have 2 enemy cards for that. From there, then you'll gather all these cards up and shuffle them up. Once they're shuffled up, then you'll place them face down on the initiative board. Next, you can place out all of the enemy cards in a quick reference area for all the players, so they can reference them throughout the game for their stats. Each of the players can select a hero that they want to play, and if there's less than 4 players, then they can choose to play multiple heroes. Each of the players will also get their corresponding dice for that hero, their action dice, and their deck of skill cards. You can also place out all the different tokens that you're using for the game, and for this video I'll be using the Crystal Fortress pod sets. If you'd like to know more information about those, I'll have a link in the description below to their website. From there, with the heroes, each hero is going to gather up a number of pizzas based on their health. So with Leonardo, he'll have 12 health, so he'll get 2 of the large pizzas, which are 5 points, and 2 pieces for his total of 12 hit points. And you'll do this for each hero. Then give each hero a number of focus tokens based on their focus stat on their cards. You can also place out the round tracker and place a token on the very first spot on that, and place out the combat dice that you'll be using for this as well. The final part of setup is that each of the hero players is going to consult their skill card stat and then also reference the scenario to determine if there's any reductions in that, and then choose a number of skill cards from their deck that they want to use for this particular scenario. So with the first scenario, it is going to subtract 1 from each of the player's skill card stats. So with Leonardo, he would choose to have 3 skill cards from his deck instead of the 4 that he normally gets, and that applies to each of the heroes. Once a player has selected the skill cards that they want, they'll keep those cards in their hands, and any remaining cards will be returned to the box that they won't be using for this scenario. In Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles, each scenario is going to outline whether it is played over an undefined number of rounds or a set number of rounds. And during each round, it is broken down into 3 phases: the setup phase, the battle phase, and the cleanup phase. And this is going to continue until one of the endgame conditions is met, with either the turtle players winning or the villains being victorious. The first phase in each round is the setup phase, and during this phase, each one of the hero players will roll their set of action dice. Then each player can choose to spend 1 focus to reroll any number of those dice that they're not happy with. Each player can only do this 1 time per round, and then the player will resolve any chi symbols they have, and then they're going to set their dice up in a row, sharing the dice on the very far left and right with the players to their left and right. So let me show you an example of this. With Leonardo, let's go ahead and give his dice a roll. And then he can choose to re-roll any of those by spending a focus. So let's go ahead and do that and spend a focus to re-roll these 2 symbols here. So at this point, Leonardo did roll a chi symbol, so he will gain a focus back. He can heal, but he is at max health. And then he will change this chi symbol to any other die facing. So he's going to go ahead and change it to a skateboard. From there, then he's going to set up his symbols how he wants. So let's do this. And then I'm going to resolve it for each of the other players. Once all the players have set their dice, then each of the players is going to receive tokens matching those symbols on the outer dice. So with Leonardo, he is going to receive the shell and katana from Donatello, and he's going to receive a skateboard from Raphael. Donatello is going to get a skateboard from Leonardo, and a pair of skateboards from Michelangelo. And this is going to continue for each of the turtles. The one important thing I want to point out with this step is that you must always resolve your chi symbols before doing this part of the turn, as you can never share a chi symbol with another player. Once all the hero players have set their dice and have received their tokens from the other players, then the last step, if this is round 2 and on, then you're going to go ahead and shuffle up the initiative deck to create a new initiative deck for the next phase. And before moving on, I want to go into a little bit more information about the chi symbol and healing. So each time a character rolls the chi symbol, they're going to regain a focus up to their maximum focus. Then they get to heal 1 battle die worth of hit points. Based on the result they roll, if they roll 1 hit, they're going to receive 1 hit point. If they roll 2, they're going to receive 2 hit points. And if they roll the turtle shell, they get nothing. So with Leonardo here, he's already at max focus, so he won't gain that. But let's go ahead and roll a battle die. And he rolled 2 successes, or 2 hits, so he would receive 2 hit points back. And then finally, you'll get to change this to any other side you want. Any other healing effects will do the same thing with you rolling a battle die and getting that number of hit points back. Before moving into the second phase of the game, there's a couple of key concepts I like to cover. The first one is adjacency, so a figure is normally adjacent to the 8 spaces surrounding that figure, and there are a couple of exceptions to this, such as elevated terrain, and I'm going to cover those more in detail during the terrain section of the video. The next is straight lines, and there's going to be a number of ability cards and other things that are going to deal in straight lines, such as the leaping strike card of Leonardo's. So as you can see with this one, it says that Leo leaps up to 3 spaces in a straight line. And the easiest way to think about this is the movement a queen can make in chess. So both orthogonal and diagonal in straight lines only for these types of movements or other effects that deal with straight lines. And the last thing is line of sight, and I'm just going to touch on that here, but I'll go into more detail about that during ranged combat. So in order to determine if you have line of sight to a target, you're going to draw a straight line from the center of your space to the center of your target space. And as long as you don't cross anything that obscures line of sight, then you have line of sight to that target. And there's going to be a couple of terrain features that are going to block line of sight, but normally enemy or hero figures do not block line of sight unless they're giant, and I'll go into that again more in detail a little bit later. The second phase in the round is the battle phase, and in cooperative mode you're going to resolve this by flipping over the top card of the initiative deck, and then that hero or enemy type will activate. Once that player or enemy type has completed their activation, you'll continue flipping over the next card until the deck is completely out. During a player's activation, they're going to spend their action dice and action symbols to do different actions. When an enemy type is activated, each enemy in that type will activate as long as they have line of sight to a character. And I'll go into more detail about this during the enemy's turn. So let's flip over the top card of the initiative deck and see who goes first. So Leonardo is the first player to activate. So the player playing him will spend his action dice to do different actions. And I'm going to take you through each one of these symbols to show you how they work. There's a number of different train types included in the game, and I'm going to take you through each one of them. The first one I'm going to look at is slow train, and that is any train feature that has a yellow border around it. Each space that you move into in slow train is going to cost 1 additional movement point. So with Leonardo, if he moves onto this park bench, it's going to cost him 2 movement points, and if he continues moving along that park bench, it's going to cost him 2 additional movement points for each space of it. And the same goes true for here. If he moves into here, it's going to cost him 2. If he moves into the next space, it's going to be 2 more movement. And then if he moves out of that space, then it only costs him 1 movement point. And slow train has no effect on line of sight. Rough train is any feature that has the red line around it, and each time a figure enters a space of rough train, their movement immediately ends and they lose any remaining movement points they have. Now if a figure has additional movement icons, they can spend another movement icon to continue moving. And this is going to have no effect on line of sight. Covered train is any feature that has a green border around it, and anytime a figure is inside a space of covered train, they're going to receive a +1 bonus to their defense, and they're also going to be considered 1 space further away from anybody that targets them with ranged combat. So, for example, with this Thug Gunner here, if he targets Leonardo, normally he'd be 2 spaces away, but with Leonardo being in covered train, he's actually 3 spaces away. And covered train has no effect on line of sight. Elevated train is any train feature that has a blue border around it. An elevated train is not considered adjacent to non-elevated train unless you're performing a climb move, and I'll go into more detail about that a little bit later. Additionally, any figure that is on low train that wishes to target a figure on elevated train is going to consider that figure 2 additional spaces away when targeting them with a ranged attack. And figures that are on low train next to figures on elevated train are not considered adjacent. So normally the Thug Gunner could not target Donatello because they're adjacent to each other, but with Donatello being on elevated train, he is not considered adjacent to the Thug Gunner. It is actually 2 additional spaces away. So normally he'd be 1 space away, but with him being on elevated train, he's actually 3 spaces away from the Thug Gunner. The other important thing is that if a model is on elevated train and they move off of elevated train to low train, then they are going to fall and take 4 combat dice worth of damage. Now there's a couple of exceptions to this. First off, if a figure performs a climb move to move down to a lower level train, then he won't take damage. Or if he moves into a dumpster space or a trash heap. So if Raphael was over here and moved into this space, he would not have to take the damage. Or if he moved onto a fire escape, as that is considered adjacent to low train and elevated train. Finally, there is a number of different effects on line of sight. So a figure can draw a line of sight from an elevated train piece to another elevated train piece as long as there's no blocking train in the way. And any figure that is on low train can target any figure on elevated train that does not cross a space of elevated train. So with the Thug Gunner here, he could target Donatello or Raphael, but he could not target Leonardo as his line of sight will draw through a space of elevated train. Likewise, Leonardo cannot target the Thug Gunner as he is drawing a line through elevated train. Leonardo can target the Thug Gunner over here though because they're both on elevated train. The one other important thing is that a figure on elevated train can target a figure on low train and there is no penalty to that, so you don't have to add that +2 range when targeting figures that are on lower train. Unstable train is any feature that has an orange border around it, and a figure may move onto a space of unstable train but cannot end their move on a space of unstable train. If they are forced to, then they will stop 1 space before moving into that space of unstable train. Obscuring train is going to be any train feature that has a gray border or the smoke tokens. Figures on spaces obscuring terrain do not need to be broken away from and are not going to help or hinder figures that are trying to awaken in adjacent spaces. And any strike made into or out of obscuring terrain is going to cost twice as many action icons. So for example, if Raphael wanted to attack the Foot Clan here, he would total up his number of icons that he's using to attack his katanas, and then half that value to determine the number of combat dice he'll roll. So for example, if Raphael played a pair of katanas, first you would consult his player board and determine his attack value, which is 2, and then you would half this value, so he would only receive 1 additional combat die for that. And the other important thing is with line of sight. So figures may draw line of sight into, but not through obscuring terrain. So the Thug Gunner here could target Raphael as he's in obscuring terrain, but he could not target Leonardo as there's obscuring terrain between the two of them. Harmful terrain is going to be any terrain feature that has a magenta border around it or the fire tokens. And each time a figure enters a space of harmful terrain, they're going to take 1 unblockable hit. If a figure starts their turn in a space of harmful terrain and does not move out of that space during their turn, they're also going to take 1 unblockable hit. And the last type of terrain is blocking terrain, and this is going to be any terrain feature has a black border around it, such as the computer terminal or these pillars here, as each one of them also has a black border. No model can ever move onto a space of blocking terrain, and line of sight is blocked by blocking terrain. So for example, with the Thug Gunners here, neither one of them can target Leonardo, as both of them are drawing line of sight through a feature of blocking terrain. Likewise, Leonardo can also not see either one of the Thug Gunners. The first icon I want to look at is the movement or skateboard icon, and this can be spent in 3 different ways. The first way is to activate some skill cards that require it. The second way is to actually move around the board, and for each movement icon you spent, you'll receive a number of movement points based on the hero's movement value. So if I spend 1 skateboard, I'll receive 3 movement points. And I can spend multiple skateboards, and each skateboard I spent will multiply that amount. So if I spend 2, I'll receive 6 movement points. These movement points can be spent to move around the board, and first with basic movement, your character can move to any one of the 8 adjacent spaces. And there are a couple of exceptions with this, like you already saw with the terrain, it's going to affect how a character moves, and there's also a couple of other features. So first off, a character can never move into the same space as a friendly or enemy model unless that model is knocked down. So for example, if Donatello was knocked down here, I could move through his space, but I cannot end on his space. Another thing is that the character has to break away from any enemy model that's adjacent to them. So if Leonardo wanted to move onto this space here, it would cost him 1 movement point, plus an additional movement point because this is slow terrain, and then 1 additional movement point per enemy that's adjacent to him. So with Leonardo, there are 2 enemies adjacent to him, plus the slow terrain, so it's going to cost him 4 movement points to move on to this location here. From there, then, if he wanted to move again, say he wanted to move here, he would again have a breakaway from this enemy, so it would cost him 2 movement points to move there. And the third way you can spend movement icons is to perform special terrain moves, and each one of these is also going to be outlined on the general terms and icon guide, as you can see here. Each one of these is going to require you to spend a number of movement icons and not movement points. And the first one I'm going to look at is taking cover, and this is going to require you to spend 2 movement icons. While on or adjacent to a space of covered terrain, which are going to be the green bordered spaces, your figure may use this action to take cover. In order to do this, you'll spend your 2 move icons and place a cover token next to your figure, and then until your figure moves or leaves that space, he is going to benefit from +2 to his defense. And this will also stack with the normal +1 defense that figures receive while on a space of covered terrain. So if Leonardo was on the space, then he would receive a +3 bonus to his defense. Otherwise, if he's just behind the space, taking cover, then he'll receive a +2 bonus. Climb is going to cost 2 movement icons and will allow you to climb up onto an empty space of elevated terrain or climb down from a space of elevated terrain. The crouch action is going to cost 2 move icons, and while adjacent to a car, dumpster, or roadblock, a figure may use this action to crouch behind the object. In order to do this, you're going to place your crouch icon next to your figure, and then until the figure begins a new action, line of sight may not be drawn to this figure through the object it's crouching behind. So in the example here, the gunner cannot see Leonardo because he's crouching behind the car. But if he was over here, he could draw line of sight to Leonardo as Leonardo is behind the car here, and he's not drawing the line through the car to see Leonardo. The leap is going to require you to spend 3 movement icons, and then you're going to be able to leap up to 3 spaces in a straight line. Leaping figures do not have to do any breakaways and aren't going to be affected by slow, which is the yellow bordered terrain, or rough terrain, which is the red bordered terrain. They may also pass through but not land on other figures. So for example, with Leonardo, if he wishes to go after the Thug Gunner, he could do a leap action, which will allow him to move up to 3 spaces in a straight line, and he could even move through a space with other figures on it, as long as the space he wishes to land in is open. So with Leonardo, he could do this, avoiding the breakaway here, and then being able to go after the Gunner. Now, Leonardo could also leap in a straight line in a different direction, so he could go off in that direction if he wanted to. Remember, straight lines come off of 8 of the axes, just like the Queen's movement in chess. And the final train move is a grind, and this is going to cost 3 movement icons to do. And while adjacent to a grindable line, which is the little orange dotted line with the little orange arrows, a figure may use this action to move along the line as far as he wishes, following the arrows. The grinding figure may make a melee attack, a +2, against each enemy figure adjacent to the rail as they move. And then the grinding figure must end their move in an empty space adjacent to the grindable line. So with Leonardo, if he wishes to grind, he'll move on there and then move down the line, and then he'll choose one of the empty spaces to move off onto. And he can do this anywhere along the line. Then any figure he moves past during that grind action, he can make a melee strike against. And first you're going to consult his attack stats, so you'll receive 1 die, and then it's +2 to that, so you'll receive 2 additional dice, so you'll get to roll 3 dice against each figure that you move along the line that's adjacent to it. The next icon I'm going to look at is the katana, and this can be used in 2 different ways. You can use it to activate skill cards and to perform melee attacks. And melee attacks can only be performed against models that are adjacent to your model, unless you have an ability or skill card that says otherwise. In order to do this, you'll nominate your target, so Leonardo's going to go ahead and target the Foot Clan Ninja, and then you'll spend 1 or more katanas to perform that attack. And for each katana you spend, you'll receive 1 battle die. So I'm going to go ahead and spend my token here that has 1 katana and my pair of katanas. So I'll receive 3 battle dice for that, and then I'll consult Leonardo's basic attack stat, which is 1, so I'll receive 1 more combat die. Then I'll go ahead and give these a roll. And I can choose to spend a focus to reroll any number of these, and I can only spend 1 focus to do this, so you can only ever reroll 1 time, and that includes a skill card that allows you to reroll. So if you have a skill card that lets you reroll, then you will not be able to use a focus die, as each of the dice can only be rerolled 1 time. From there, once you're satisfied, then you'll total up the number of hits that you did and compare them to your enemy's defensive stat. So as you can see on the Foot Clan Ninja's card, he has a defense of 2, so he'll eliminate 2 hits, and then the remaining hits will go against his number of hit points. And the Foot Clan has 2 hit points per model, so the 2 hits will eliminate this model, removing him and adding him back over to the supply. And the third icon I want to look at is the Shuriken, which is used for ranged attacks. These work pretty much the same way as melee attacks with a couple of additional rules. First, you can never target an enemy that's adjacent to you. They must be at least 1 space away to make a ranged attack against them, and you must have line of sight to the enemy you wish to target. In order to determine this, you're going to draw a straight line from the center of your space to the center of your target space, and as long as that line does not cross anything that blocks line of sight, then you have line of sight to your target. And remember that both enemies and friendlies do not block line of sight to your target. And ranged attacks are going to get weaker the further away the target is from the attacker. If the target is more than 2 spaces away from the attacker, then the strike's hits are going to be reduced by 1 for every space beyond the second space. So let me show you an example of this. Let's go ahead and spend the 1 Shuriken that Leonardo has, and he'll get 1 battle die. And then he'll check on his board for his basic attack stat, which will also give him 1 die. And then he'll go ahead and roll those dice. He can spend a focus to reroll any of those dice 1 time, and then he's going to compare those results with his ranged attack. So first off, we are 1, 2, 3 spaces away from our attacker, so we're 1 space beyond that 2 space limit, so we're going to lose 1 hit per space that we are beyond that. And remember that enemies that are on elevated terrain are also going to add +2 to that. So if the foot soldier was on elevated terrain, he would have actually been 5 spaces away, and Leonardo's entire attack would have been wiped away from that. Finally, then again, we'll check his defense, which the foot soldier's defense is 2. So these 2 don't make it through his defense, and Leonardo was not lucky enough to get any hits on the foot soldier. And the last icon I want to go over is the turtle shell, which you'll find by itself and in combination. With the turtle shell, you do not have to spend it. It is always going to be active throughout your turn, and each turtle shell is going to provide you 1 additional defense on top of your base defense. For example, if the Thug Brawler wants to attack Leonardo, he's going to do 1 damage to Leonardo, and then Leonardo gets to make his defensive roll. So he'll check his base defensive stat, which will give him 3 defensive dice, and then he's going to look at his dice, and if he has any shells, he gets 1 additional defensive die per turtle shell that he has. And then you also want to reference any skills or skill cards you have in play. From there, then, he gets to roll his dice, and for each turtle shell that he rolls, he blocks 1 point of damage that comes at him. And with this, again, you can spend 1 focus token to reroll any results that you want to. Each time a hero performs a melee or ranged attack, they must spend at least 1 of their action icons on their dice or tokens in order to perform that attack. A hero is never allowed to make an attack just using their base attack stats. From there, I want to go into a little bit more detail about these skill cards. So each player can play 1 skill card during their turn, and some of these skill cards are going to have a cost in the upper left-hand corner in action icons. The player will have to pay in order to use that card. And some of the cards will only have an action that will be resolved, and then that card will have no other effect, where other cards, such as the probing attack, will last until the next time this player takes a turn. With this card, it will allow Leonardo, while his card is active, he may reroll his battle dice for free once per melee strike. Or I'll hold them off. This one, while this card is active, figures adjacent to Leonardo treat him as 3 figures when breaking away or awakening. And in addition, Leo receives +1 defense, and all friendly figures adjacent to Leo receive +2 defense. So you have to make sure that you're aware of what your different heroes are playing, because they can benefit other players. And each time a player plays a skill, they're going to go ahead and place it face up in front of them so that they know that they've played their skill for the round, and then other players can reference it as well. The one other important thing with combat is that each time a hero suffers 1 or more wounds from an attack, they can go on the defensive by turning 1 or more of their action dice to the turtle shell side. And if a hero does not have a turtle shell side, then you can simply use tokens to represent that instead. Now, one important note with this is that you cannot change the icons you receive from other heroes, but if you choose to change the side that you're sharing with another hero, then that hero also has to change their token that they received from you. Once a player has completed all of their actions or chooses not to perform any additional actions, their turn comes to an end. At that point, you're going to reveal the next card in the initiative deck, so let's see who we have. Some Thug Brawlers. So now I get to talk about AI-controlled villains. And normally during an AI-controlled villain's turn, they can only perform move actions, ranged actions, or melee actions. And there are 2 different types of villains. You have minions and leaders. Minions will get to perform 2 actions during their turn, and leaders will perform 3. In either situation, both minions and leaders can only perform 1 move action during their turn unless they have a special ability that says otherwise. When activating a villain group that has more than 1 model in it, each model in that group will activate that can draw line of sight to 1 or more heroes, and this is done in a specific order with the villain that is closest to a hero activating first and then proceeding out from there. Each villain that you activate must complete all of its actions before activating the next villain in that group. From there, let's look at an example of this. For this example, let's place Donatello on this subway car, and then we're going to check each one of the Thug Brawlers to see if they have line of sight to any of the turtles on the board. So this one has line of sight to Donatello, along with that one as well. This one does not have line of sight to any of the turtles, as the subway car here is elevated terrain and blocks his line of sight to all of them. Then we're going to determine which one is going to activate first, which is the one that is closest to its target, which again is going to be Donatello. With the Thug Brawlers, they are a melee enemy, so they must be adjacent to their enemy to attack them. So the first thing he's going to do is perform a move action, and each minion can only perform 1 move action, and they have 2 actions that they can spend. So he's going to move first, so we're going to check his movement stat, which is 3, so he can move up to 3 spaces, so he's going to move here. Now, he is not adjacent to Donatello, as Donatello is on the elevated terrain, and this brings up the next point, which is the climb action. That is the only terrain action that a minion or leader can perform, and it is not considered a move action, but it does take up 2 action points to do. So it would take up an entire minion's turn in order to do that. So in order for this villain or this minion to perform a climb action, it must start its turn in the space adjacent to the elevated piece of terrain. So his turn would be over as he cannot perform another action, and then it would move over to this villain or this minion. So he's going to move first, moving 1 space and 2, 3 into that slow terrain. Again, he can only perform one move action, so his turn is also over. But I do want to show how an attack works, so we're going to go ahead and place these guys back, and we're going to move Donatello here. So now when we activate this villain, he is adjacent to Donatello, so he is going to attack him with his first action. So we're going to check his attack stat, which is 1, and villains do not need to roll for their attack, that's just auto damage. But our heroes do get to make a defensive roll. So first off, they're going to check their defensive stat, which Donatello's is 4, so he'll get 4 dice for that. Then he's going to check his dice to see if he has any turtle shells, and he does have 2, so he's going to gain 2 more. And then he'll also want to check and consult any of the active hero action cards that are out there to see if they give any bonuses, such as Leonardo's, which does if he's adjacent to his friendly turtles. But he is not, so he will not get any bonuses for that. So then Donatello is going to give this a roll. And for each turtle shell that he rolls, he blocks 1 point of damage. Now, if, for example, he had not rolled any shells, or if he did not roll enough to prevent all the damage, he can spend a focus to reroll some or all of his dice. So in this situation, he did roll a shell, so he blocked all that damage, and then the minion will perform its second action, which again is going to be an attack on Donatello, so we'll roll again, and Donnie blocks that as well. Then the next minion will activate, which is going to move 1, 2, 3 again, and then he's adjacent to Donatello, so he'll attack again. And let's go ahead and say this time that Donatello did not block any attacks, and he doesn't want to spend a focus, so he would simply lose 1 health point. From there, we've activated all of the Thug Brawlers, so we would reveal the next card in the initiative deck. The one other minion group I want to talk about are the Thug Gunners, as they are a ranged enemy which has 1 additional step than melee enemies. And they also have the eagle-eyed special rule, which has been questioned a number of times on forums, as they are going to try to target in groups if they're able to. So for this example, I'm going to place Donatello back here, I'm going to place Raphael here, and I'm going to add another Thug Gunner there. Then, just like with melee enemies, you're going to determine which Thug Gunners have line of sight to turtles. So this guy has line of sight to Raphael, Michelangelo, and Leonardo, but not Donatello, as he's drawing a line through elevated terrain. This one has line of sight to Leonardo and Raphael, and these two have line of sight to none of the turtles. From there, the new step is optimal strike range. With ranged enemies, this is the range of their weapons that they are within so that they don't lose any dice when attacking. With the Thug Gunners, their range is 4, where normal enemies are 2. So then we're going to check to see which turtles are within that optimal strike range. If none of the turtles were, then they would move first to try to get within optimal strike range before attacking. If they were not, then they would attack but get weakened. So with this Thug Gunner here, he has a range, optimal range to both Raphael, Michelangelo, and Leonardo, where this one has optimal strike range to Leonardo and Raphael. So then these two would group up to attack either Raphael or Leonardo, and then they're going to go off of the attack priority, which is going to be the turtle that has the highest health at that current point based on their current health and not their health stat. So Leonardo has 12, where Raphael has 10. So they're going to group up and attack Leonardo for their first attack. So with that, they're going to add up their attacks, so each one would do 1 damage for a total of 2 damage, and then Leonardo will check his defense. So again, he is going to gather his dice, so he's going to get 3 for his base defense. He gets 1 for his turtle shell, and then he's going to check his card, which allows him to receive an additional 1 defense. So again, he's going to roll like normal, and he blocked 2 points of damage, so he doesn't take any. Then again, they would recalculate that attack, and again, they would go after Leonardo, so he would go ahead and roll a second time, and this time he only stopped 1. Again, he could spend a focus to re-roll the other dice that missed, or he can just take the 1 damage. Once that is done, then it would move on to the next ones, and unlike other minions where you have to activate one at a time, they activate it as a group when attacking. Now, the one other thing I want to point out is, for example, let's say that this minion was here, or this Thug Gunner was here. You can draw line of sight through 2 obstacles that normally block line of sight at a perfect angle. So let's say that Raphael was here instead. So now this Thug Gunner can see Raphael. He is 1, 2, 3, 4 spaces away. So let's go ahead and say that he was here. So he is not within optimal strike range. So first off, he would move to get into optimal strike range, and then as his second action, he would attack Raphael, which again, he would make his defensive roll as normal. And the last thing I want to take a look at are minion leaders. So with Alplex, she has got 3 actions that she can do during her turn. So for this example, I'm going to go ahead and place her here. I'm going to have Donatello up here, and I'll have Leonardo behind him. So with her first action, she is going to move, and she has a special ability which is Agile, which means that she can perform 2 move actions, and she's also not affected by slow or elevated terrain. So her movement is 4, so she can move 1, 2, 3, and 4. And again, she is not affected by elevated terrain because of her special rule, so she would not have to perform that climb action. Then her second action, she would attack the turtles. And now that she is adjacent to them and she has a melee attack, she has equal range to them and they're both in her range. So then she would check her secondary priority, which is lowest health. So then she'll consult them, and Donatello has the lowest health, so she would attack him as normal. And she would do 2 damage and he would make his defensive roll. Now the one other ability that she has is her defense. So when a turtle attacks her, she is going to have a special defense. First off, the turtle will resolve all of his attacks. So say, for example, Donatello rolled 4 attack dice and he had a couple come up as shells. He would choose to spend focus as usual to re-roll those. Once he has resolved that and spent a focus if he wanted to, and his attack is complete, at that point, then her defense triggers where she's going to roll 1 die, and if it comes up as a turtle shell, she negates that entire attack and it's been wasted. Otherwise, if it comes up as a hit, then you resolve it as normal, taking away her defense as usual. Once you've revealed and resolved all of the cards in the initiative deck, then the battle phase comes to an end and you'll move into the final phase of the round, which is the cleanup phase. During this phase, you're going to spawn enemies from the enemy pool, which will be made up of enemies that were added in there before the game and any enemies you defeated during the round. The enemies in the pool will be separated into their different types, and then you'll spawn half of each of the enemy types rounding up. So for example, with this one, I have 1 Thug Gunner, so rounding up, he'll be added. I have 2 Thug Brawlers, so I'll get 1 of them back, and a Foot Clan Ninja that'll be spawned back. And there's 2 different ways the enemies are going to be spawned. If there are no spawn points out on the board, then the enemies will be added at the end of the board, placing each enemy type one after the other, and you cannot add a second enemy of the same type until you've placed at least 1 of each of the other enemies out. So if I would have had another Thug Brawler, he would have had to been placed last after I placed out the other enemies, and then I'd place him out. And this will continue with each of the enemy types. The other way is if you have spawn points out on the board. So let's go ahead and say that we have these. At this point, then again, you'll be placing out enemies starting in the spawn point that is closest to an enemy hero. So for example, this one here, and you'll place out 1 of the enemies from the spawn in that point, and then work your way around the board, placing out each enemy in those areas. And you won't add a second enemy of the same type until you've placed out 1 of each of the other enemies. So again, for example, if I had another Thug Brawler, then at this point he would come out on this spawn point as I'm back to that one. Once you've completed spawning the enemies, you also want to reference the scenario you're playing for any special instructions that need to be handled during this phase. From there, then you're also going to move the round tracker down 1 space, and then if the game is not over, you'll go ahead and start the next round. When a hero loses their last hit point, they're going to be knocked down and placed on their side. During their next activation, they're going to make an awaken attempt by rolling a number of battle dice. And there's a sequence that you're going to follow in order to determine the number of battle dice you're going to roll. First, you're going to check your hero's card and determine their base defense and receive a number of battle dice equal to that. So with Leonardo, he has a 3, so he'll receive 3 battle dice. Then he's going to look at all of his action dice and icons and determine if he has any turtle shells, which Leonardo has 2, so he'll receive 1 battle die per shell that he has. Then for each hero that's adjacent to him, he's going to receive 2 additional battle dice. So with Raphael and Donatello next to him, he'll get 4 more. Then each minion that's next to him, he is going to lose 1 battle die, and right now Leonardo does not have any minions adjacent to him. And each villain leader is going to subtract 3 battle dice from that result. And any of these situations, they also have to be up. If anything is knocked down, it will not add bonuses to that. From there, then Leonardo is going to roll those battle dice and total up the amount that he rolled. If that amount is equal to or greater than his awakened value, he'll get to stand up and continue his turn. If not, he's going to receive a KO token, which at that point, a lot of the missions are going to end with a failure on the hero's part if a hero receives a KO token. You are not allowed to spend a focus token as well to reroll any of your results. So with our result here, we had 4, 5, 6, 7, which was really close, but not enough for Leonardo as he needed an 8 or higher on his awakened value. Now let's say that he did roll an 8. In this situation, he is going to stand back up. He would receive 8 hit points or a number of hit points based on the number of successes you've rolled, and then he can continue his turn. And again, you have to roll equal to or greater than that awakened value to get back up. There'll be a number of effects and ways that the players are going to gain stun tokens, and for each stun token a player-controlled character has, they'll have to spend one of their action icons that is not a turtle shell to remove it. With the AI-controlled enemies, each stun token that they have is going to cost them one action to remove. So with the Foot Clan, when he takes a stun token, he'll have to spend his first action to remove it, and then he'll follow his normal parameters for his second action. Giant figures take up more than one space on the map and block line of sight. When a giant figure is knocked down, it becomes slow terrain, and giant figures are going to count as 2 figures when breaking away or awakening, and giant figures cannot perform terrain moves and are not affected by slow terrain. Tiny characters are going to have their own set of rules, and most of those are going to be outlined on their card. So as you can see with the mousers, they are considered a minion, and that's going to outline exactly how they work. So you can have up to 3 mousers in one space, so they can share a space. And when they are in a space together, they're going to total up their attack and defensive values. So in this space here, their attack would be 3 and their defense would be 3. And with the tiny characters, they're going to activate a little bit differently. So in this game, with us playing a cooperative mission, each of the mousers is going to move up to 2 spaces, and then all the mousers in each space are going to attack a character that they're adjacent to. So we would start with this space here and attack Leo, and this has 2 mousers, so they would attack Leo for 2 damage, and then he'd make his defensive roll as normal. The other important thing is when Leo attacks a space, he attacks the entire space. He doesn't have to target one mouser. And then let's go ahead and say that he rolls 3 dice and gets 4 successes. With the mousers in this space, there's 3 of them, so their defense is 3 as it's equal to the number of mousers in the space. And then they have 1 hit point total, so he does 1 extra damage, and so the entire set of 3 mousers would be eliminated, not just 1. And a couple other important things, tiny characters cannot perform train moves, and they are not going to be stunned. And when calculating awakening and breakaway, you will count the space itself and not the number of tiny characters that are in the space. So for example, if Leo was knocked down and he wanted to get back up, this would count as 1 minion per space. So he would have 2 minions that were adjacent to him. Or if he wanted to move away, this would count as 2 minions and not each individual mouser.